Welcome everyone. You're early, so you get a little gold star.
Yeah, the extra hot tips come at 11:59 Eastern Standard. So tonight's lotto numbers are.
Oh, Phil is here. We got to be careful. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Phil.
Welcome everybody. Sal made it. Oh, Sal. Ask some good questions. Okay, everybody get used to chatting because we're going to make this kind of interactive. Just go ahead and chat where you're coming in from and if it's still really hot. Welcome, Tiffany.
And remember to change your chat to everyone so everybody can see.
Oh,
Exactly.
good. Change your chat to everyone. So hosts and panelists. Yeah, chat to everybody. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes to log in and we'll get going with Will here. Hello, everyone. Sal, where are you today? To hosts and panelists, to everyone, Florida. Yes, of course. Welcome, everybody, to our benchmarks discussion with Will. We're going to get going in just a second. Just chat in where you're coming from and if it's still super hot for you. Welcome, Sharon, Nalini, Luciana. Hello, Lisa. Nice to see everybody coming in. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay. Welcome, Sean, Tiffany, Max, Marissa, Halifax, Jane. How is Halifax? I'm hoping it's a little cooler than Toronto. Okay, we've got a good group. I say we dig in. What do you say?
Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody? We are really excited to have you all here. We're going to make this kind of conversational, so please just kind of chat with us. It's always an important moment in the year when M+R drops their benchmarks report. I've always loved it because it gives us such a good view of the data. And we're lucky to have Will Valverde here with us to go through the 2025 benchmarks report. And then I kind of changed the subtitle, Fundraising Chaos, because a lot of our clients are feeling a little chaotic right now. So we thought we would provide a little direction through the chaos. But before we get going, Jess, if you'll click the next slide, let's just do a little intros. I think most of you know me probably. My name's Philip King. I'm the managing director of STella, which is our new digital fundraising agency that's born out of ST in Toronto. I get to work with a whole bunch of really interesting clients that are all trying to accelerate their digital revenue. So the M+R benchmarks are, it's so helpful to me to see what's going on with their clients and how our clients compare. Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Will Valverde. I'm a senior vice president at M+R and the lead writer of Benchmarks. I'm excited to join you all today to talk a little bit about those findings. One thing I do want to point out, just to correct Philip a little bit, the Benchmarks participants are not exclusively M+R clients. We have 216 participants this year. A bunch of them are. We're always happy to work with our clients on Benchmarks, but it is not it's not reserved to M+R clients. So if you're somebody who would like to participate in Benchmarks and you're like, oh no, we can't, you absolutely can reach out.
It is such a good clarification.
I will plug that further that many of our clients that we work with participate in the M+R benchmarking, and we help them collect all their data and figure out how to, make sure we're reporting on that data accurately. And I think, I don't know, Will, hopefully this is accurate, but M+R publishes the general benchmark, which kind of aggregates everyone into categories, which you'll see the data today. And then participants who provide their data get a very tailored version where they see their organization. And I believe those have just been shared with most of the organizations because a lot of our clients have said, oh, we got our individual report. So another plug for a great way to, see how you measure up every year and then also against everybody else, but also track from year to year how you're doing using your fantastic benchmarking. So
yeah, those personalized reports are one of the many benefits of being a benchmark participants along with the street cred.
Yes. And I'm Jess Tiberio. So I'm the Senior Director of Digital Fundraising Strategy. So I work with our clients, and I always say I'm a fundraiser first, a direct response marketer, and then who's learned how to speak digital. So I really come from it from kind of that direct marketing fundraising perspective, and then how do we leverage digital to drive new relationships, new revenue, and keep those donors as much as we can and move them up the donor ladder.
Just housekeeping. You'll see we've got our contact info here, our LinkedIn email. We're going to provide a recording of this plus the slides, so you'll be able to follow up with this if you want. Okay.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Okay.
Oh, we can just go to the next one. So very briefly, if you're new to M+R, we work solely with nonprofits who are advancing the cause of justice, alleviating suffering, and solving our greatest challenges. We do fundraising and supporter engagement. We do movement building and issue advocacy, message and brand development, all sorts of fun stuff. And one of the things that we do at M+R is really try to share what we've learned. We have a blog that we sort of publish regularly too, with tips and test findings and that sort of thing. And one of our biggest efforts every year is the M+R Benchmark study. I'm not going to keep on rehashing what it is, but what this is data from 216 organizations covering primarily the 2024 data and looking back from there. It's our way of sort of taking stock every year, sort of where we are and what seems to be changing. And we try to share that as broadly as we can. So I really appreciate everybody reading, paying attention. We're going to cover some of it today. There's so much more of it. So I do encourage you to read the full study. It's available at mrbenchmarks.com.
Jess, you want to do it?
Oh, go ahead.
Stella's kind of a new child of ST. ST's been around in direct response fundraising for, a long time in Canada. And we're realizing that many of our clients, they clearly want an integrated direct response strategy. They want digital that integrates to mail, that integrates to phone, that integrates to texting. Stella is the team that Jess and I are leading that's really doing that deep dive on the digital piece. It's the part that I've always been interested in, but now we're really trying to weave it into the DNA of the overall agency as we look at all integrated direct response. And on the next picture, if I were to put a picture of Stella, this is Stella. So we go with our clients to the gym to help you work out faster. Now, what is the workout in this case? It's the acceleration of digital revenue. Your digital revenue should be growing. I mean, we're going to see this in the benchmark data. It should be growing. It's going to grow at a certain rate. What we're done, the teams bring us in to work out with your team a faster growth rate than you would otherwise experience. So that's what Stella likes to do.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's start looking at some charts. So there's, like I said, there's way more than we can fit into a single presentation. I'm going to try to hit as many of the most important and what I thought were the most interesting points from this year's study findings. And then we should have lots of time for questions and answers. If you do have questions as we go along, please do drop them into the chat. We will cover them as we go along or make room for discussion at the end. So diving right in, the first question that we always ask when we gather our benchmarks data is what happened to revenue, just as sort of a top line baseline number. And overall online revenue showed modest growth in 2024. It was up 2% overall. That's a big headline number. It's 2%. A lot goes into that. A lot of hard work from a lot of nonprofits, all of you who are on this call, trying to motivate donors, to recruit new supporters, all of that work that happens. It has led to sort of modest growth year over year. And when we look at those numbers more deeply, I think one of the most important things to take away from it is that the increase in revenue was actually an increase in monthly giving. One-time giving overall was flat year over year from the previous year. We had a 5% increase in monthly giving. And so that's really where the growth has been. And that is a long-term trend. So this is my, I want to say 13th edition of benchmarks that I have worked on. Every single year that we have broken out one-time and monthly giving has grown at a faster rate. And that has been like a really, really consistent trend year over year. And that is I think a combination of user preferences. So supporters are more likely now than in the past to be like, I have all these subscriptions in my life, or the way that I want to support organizations is sort of similarly $25 a month, $30 a month. A lot of it is also this sort of like ongoing drumbeat from the nonprofit sector over year, day after day, sort of emphasizing reliable giving is really, really important. So as we are doing that, we are also training supporters to prioritize monthly giving, and we are seeing that that combination of factors lead toward more important monthly giving. when we look at one-time giving, the real standout here, and this is going to happen again and again in our charts, is disaster international aid as a sector. This is a sector that saw a really big spike in one-time giving in 2020 at the outset of the invasion of Ukraine, and 2024. 2020, a couple of years ago. I'm sorry, 2022 was the first year. That's right. We saw a big spike in giving in 2022. It has been coming back down to earth a little bit since then. And so what we see is an increase in monthly giving, a healthy 8% increase in monthly giving for that sector, but a really sharp decline in one-time giving. So I think some of what we're seeing is emergency donors either not being retained or being converted to monthly donors, which is actually a really positive development. We also did see a good spike in direct mail revenue for this sector as well. So I think some of what we're seeing is those emergency online donors eventually being converted to other channels.
Yeah, there's an international aid organization we work with, and they saw a huge jump in their monthly numbers. And when they dug into it, it was donors who had given to Gaza and then now have converted to monthly. So being able to, emergency donors, I know are always very challenging because they're so responsive, but to have a little bit of a longer view to say, can we convert these people to monthly? They've given once, but now can we change the call to action to get them to give a smaller gift, but monthly? And this data shows that perhaps that's really what's happening here, which is cool, really cool.
Yeah. As I said, there's lots of different reasons why monthly giving has been growing faster than one-time giving, but part of this is really under our control. We can influence it at least, aside from the donor preference. So we made an effort this year to survey Benchmarks participants and be like, how are you promoting monthly giving on your main donation page? So if you go to the website, you click the big red donate button in the top right corner, you land on that page. 35% of nonprofits in our study pre-check monthly giving on that page. So they are making that be the default option, a little bit more than a third. 77% of them promote monthly giving at some point. That says on the main donation page, that should say on. And so oftentimes that is that sort of nudge language that says the most effective way you can give is by becoming a monthly donor, or that sort of language, even if you're not pre-checking it, is emphasized. And 41% of nonprofits in our study use an upsell lightbox. So if somebody makes a one-time gift, at some point in that process, they get a pop-up little reminder saying, would you like to convert your giving to monthly giving? That's going to be more effective. So all of these things add up, and we're training our supporters to value monthly giving. I think you see the sort of ultimate outcome of that when you look at the public media bar chart. There are 3 charts from the bottom where they have spent their decades now, public media, training supporters to view default sustaining giving as sort of the default mode of supporting their organizations.
And is this one of the first years you've tracked annual as part of that too, Will?
We did. We took a look at recurring giving that is framed as being annual giving, so an annual membership that recurs. It is relatively small, but it is something that is out there. So I think that.
Okay.
So the upside of all that continued growth, monthly giving made up 31% of online revenue. So as it continues to outgrow at a faster rate than one-time giving, it is still not the majority of giving for most organizations. We see that is sort of continuing the trend. And some of our clients we work with do see that monthly giving is now a bigger share of their total revenue than one-time giving. A lot of this comes down to issue area. We tend to see big swings in one-time giving, as we saw in disaster international aid. Emergency response tends to really drive those swings. But those organizations that have really invested in sustaining giving over the years, at this point, I think in many cases have larger monthly giving programs than one-time giving programs.
Will, question from the audience. Did you look at monthly numbers by device, for example, desktop versus mobile?
I don't think we have that. So we do have conversion rates and transaction data by website versus mobile, by desktop versus mobile. I don't think that we broke out percentages of monthly donors.
This is coming from Sal, who's seen a lot of data from Fundraise Up. And he said, we often see lower dollar, but higher monthly conversion on mobile. I wonder if that's a wider trend. And so just to echo that, one thing I will say at this point in your deck, we are seeing, I mean, definitely in the Canadian crowd, because part of what we'll do is translate some of your numbers into Canada. I know some of the participants were Canadian. We did see growth in one time in Canada, primarily due to the postal strike. We had a big postal strike last year that drove tons of direct mail donors online.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're looking at a couple of specific channels now. We're going to start with email because email is my favorite. Overall, email accounted for 11% of online revenue. And this is sort of the breakdown by sector. I should note, most of our data is broken out by sector. Sometimes you'll see a sector drop off one of these charts, so like you might not see public media on one of them. When that happens, it's because we didn't have enough data from that sector for that metric to report an average. So if that's what's happening there. And if you're not sure where you fall, again, we have a list of all the participants at mrbenchmarks.com, so you can see where your peers are. If you're like, oh, am I a rights or am I a health? The participants self-identify for which sector they'd like to be placed into. Anyway, all that preface. The 11% number here, I think, undercounts a little bit the actual impact of email programs. We know from lots of testing, from lots of experience, that people who receive email become more likely to give in other channels immediately after receiving that email. So someone might read the email on their phone and then go to a desktop device to make a donation, go right to your website. Or they might do a search rather than clicking on the donate button. So we know that this 11% is sort of the baseline. Probably the impact of email is a little bit higher than this, but so this 11% is just tracked directly to actual people clicking on email donation links. And so that's the impact here. And that 11% or the email revenue declined by 11% last year. There was a bigger drop for some sectors. Cultural organizations saw a really big drop at 36%. All these numbers, by the way, when I'm talking about the average here, this is the median figure. So half of the groups in our study fell below this number, half the groups in our study fell above this number. 11% decline in year-over-year revenue for email was this overall average.
And well, do you have any like hypothesis as to why that is?
It hurts my feelings. Like I said, email is my favorite. It is how I've been doing email fundraising for 20 years, and it has never been easy, but it has never been harder, I think, than it is right now.
Yeah.
And I think some of what we are seeing are just changes in the way that the providers are treating email. So being put into promotions tab is not the same thing as being in the regular inbox. So some of those changes are structural, outside of our control. Some of the data is harder to see because of privacy changes, all of that. A lot, when we dug into the numbers, one of the factors that surprised me a little bit was how much of the decline seemed to be at the stage of page completion. So we saw actually not a big amount of change in like click-through rates. Click-through rates seem to be pretty consistent year over year for fundraising messages. But when we looked at the percentage of people who land on that donation page and actually complete their gift, that was where we saw a bigger drop. I don't want to make too much about that because if you start to slice up the numbers, you can find some artifacts that aren't really reflecting reality. But I do think that there is something really interesting about that particular stage in the process. Oftentimes we say, if the email is not performing, what do you do to the email to fix that, right? Do you get a different audience? Do you have a different content? Do you put different buttons? Do you have more graphics? All the stuff we can do with email. I think it's really important to remember that is a bigger experience than that, and that what happens on the landing page can be just as important.
That's a great point.
For the most part, list sizes did continue to increase in 2024. We saw a 3% average increase over the course of the year in email list size. That followed from 6% and 4% increases the previous years. So small but consistent growth year over year has been sort of the story. The growth that we're talking about here represents net change in email file size. So we look at the email file on January 1st and we look at it on December 31st and we subtract. So that includes a lot of list growth. That list growth is being driven from lots of different places. One of the places that was really prominent was through paid ad lead generation. That was one of the big sources of new names. But there's lots of different ways that we're growing our lists. This also accounts for the decline that we see. So we do report on, I'm not going to get into the churn numbers, but we report on hard bounces, unsubscribes. Those numbers are basically unchanged always. They always kind of look the same. It's low single-digit percentages. The other thing that plays into active email list size, what we're talking about here is active email list, is what we decide counts as active. And that is something that every organization gets to decide for themselves. And so this year we did take a look at how we are defining active and inactive to try to get a better handle on that. And here, what it is, this is a lot to look at, so I'm going to sort of walk you through it. So what we're looking at here is we asked our participants where they draw the line, what criteria they use to say you are now count as active on our email file, and we'll continue to email you like an active person, or you are now inactive. Inactive doesn't mean we delete your name necessarily. Inactive sometimes means we put you in a reactivation file and we're sending you a particular set of content, or we're going to arrest you for a little while, or we're going to make sure that your email addresses are not spam traps, all the different ways we can be handling those. But in order to sort of qualify for the active portion of an email file, if somebody opened an email in the last month or less, 88% of our participants are counting that as you're an active person. That is one of the ways that we are determining if you're active, if you've opened in the last month. And you can go down that second column. If you've opened an email in the last 6 months, 80% of participants are saying that counts as an active user. Once you get out, you haven't opened an email in a year, 52%. And if you have not, it's been more than a year, you really start to plummet. So that's where you're seeing a lot of cutoff is after 12 months, a lot of nonprofits are saying, if you haven't opened in the last year, we're counting you as inactive. That's not the only criteria. As we know, opens are not the most reliable metric, although they can be. This is basically the use case for opens for most organizations is like, even if it's Apple's machine opens, it still counts as an active email file. That still somebody is using that email address. And that sort of like that about a year since you've done a thing, since you've clicked on an email link, since you've taken an action online. If you've done it in the last year, about half of organizations will count you as active still. At the far right here, if you've given in the last 12 months, almost 70% of nonprofits are like, you're still inactive. We're still going to keep on reaching out to you. And that doesn't drop off nearly as much after that. So if it's been 15 months, it's still a third of nonprofits are like, we haven't heard from you in a while, but we're going to keep on sending you emails and treating you as active. So as you're drawing those own lines, we thought this was really a really helpful way to just be like, what is everybody else doing? Because this is nuanced, and I think a lot of folks feel like they're kind of making this up as they go along. So here's what your peers are making up as they go along.
Well, it's so interesting. We literally had this conversation this morning with someone because they've just kind of been emailing everybody without siphoning their data. And to your earlier point about the decline of email, like what does that do to your deliverability? With all of these, the promotions tabs and the, DMarks and all that. And to actually look at, so I'd encourage people to look at their email file and say, okay, what do we consider are active? And if they're not in there, then you shouldn't be emailing them because it's going to affect your Google your deliverability, your email deliverability and your scoring, which then affects able to get into your active donors' email inboxes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Super important to track your deliverability by email provider. So look at your your Gmail numbers compared to your Yahoo numbers, or your Hotmail numbers, whatever. That makes a big difference. And as well, the other thing about not having a big inactive, even if you're not seeing any harm in your deliverability, if you're doing any kind of testing, doing testing with a large dead weight file that is not going to open or respond to anything makes it so much harder to find viable results because it all gets sort of drowned out by the sort of like thud of landing on an inactive email file.
Will, there's a question from Catherine. How many emails should be sent every month before fatigue sets in?
Well, we do have, so I don't think we're going to cover them today. We do have numbers about volume, so you can see what the average is. I think it was something like 68 messages per year was the average that people were getting, about half of those fundraising messages. That's not an indication of fatigue. That's just sort of like what most people are doing. My advice is always to send as many emails as you have that are worth sending and not send more than that. I think there's not a particular set there's not an amount. I think if you are sending messages because your messages aren't performing well and you're trying to make up that gap through volume, I think that's a very difficult place to be in. That spiral can really lead downward very quickly. If you're increasing volume because your issue is more salient now than it was at some other point, if you're increasing your volume because the Supreme Court did something terrible today and it affects your issue area, so you're going to send 5 messages over the next 2 days to respond to that, absolutely do that. If you're sending 5 messages over 2 days for no reason, people won't like that. So I think it is less a question of there being a particular threshold of attention or exhaustion, and much more, are you communicating in a way that is meaningful to you and to your audiences as well? And this is sort of the overall summary of what the value of having one email subscriber is on your list. So over the course of the full year, and there were 0.13 email actions taken per subscriber, and $2.63 donated per subscriber via email. So that's sort of like at the end of the year, how much did you get out of each subscriber on average? One thing I want to point out with these charts is you see that number in the black box. That is our median figure. Again, that's sort of the halfway point. And then the colored bars to the left and right, the whiskers on this box and whiskers, that goes down to the 25th percentile, that sort of light blue bar to the left, and then up to the 75th percentile. So you can see, for example, with disaster and international aid, the median group was seeing $5.10 from each person on their email file. At the 75th percentile, the ones who are doing better than 75% of the other groups in that sector, it was over $15 per email subscriber over the year. So a really big range on that. And so if you're falling kind of anywhere along that box and whiskers chart, you are within the middle 50% of the thing you're looking at. So you can consider that sort of a normal result.
Can I just say something before? So just to wrap up email, we know it's Will's favorite area for all sorts of good reasons, but it's shrinking. The revenue's shrinking, which is always my worry. I love email, but I hate that it's shrinking. So in all these other areas, we have to not only make up the gap in email, but now we got to grow the file. We got to grow the revenue size. So that's what we're going to get into next. Any other final thoughts about email, Will? Just strategically as we come into the giving season in the next 6 months, like how are you approaching email differently now than you were this time last year?
What I'm thinking about between now and end of year, because we know that on December 31st, it's going to be a 5 times match turns into a 10 times match with a midnight deadline. Like, right, that, and the tactics are in many cases sort of really commonly used and harder to break through. And so we continue to escalation. We're going to see heavy volume. There are some things that are sort of baked into sort of the way that nonprofits are operating. There's room now to strengthen those relationships and to make sure that you're top of mind when that happens. So I think a fall focus on engagement, on activism, on cultivation, on demonstrating value, I think is really, really important as you lead into sort of like October into November before we really hit that busy giving season. I think finding a way for your narrative to matter in the first half of December, sort of the pre-Christmas time, really, is really difficult. You see lots of organizations doing a 24-hour campaign sort of earlier in the month to try to do a flash match or something, sort of like allow their tactics and their moment to break free a little bit of the crowd, I think can be helpful. But every program is different, and sort of how you are demonstrating your value, how you are strengthening those relationships is going to really depend on whether you have cute animal pictures available to you or whether you have a donor impact statement available to you and sort of the way that you're making those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And then just one final question from Phil. Knowing that email is shrinking, are you using any strategies to utilize the shrinking list to bring them into other channels to keep remarketing to them?
Yes. And so I think that the treating your email list as some sort of a separate audience, I think is we've always talked about multi-channel. I think that's just more important than it's ever been. We are seeing an overlap between mobile and email sort of much more significantly now than we have in previous years. And like I mentioned earlier with Disaster and International Aid, treating your email emergency donors as a great direct mail prospect list is a part of how we are doing this work. So it is like email revenue as a percentage of overall revenue has shrunk on average. I think there are many organizations, many clients of ours, and just organizations out there that are still finding growth year over year. They're doing it by aggressively growing their email list or investing in larger email lists. It is not, I think, from what I have seen, primarily a question of volume. It's not because they're just sending more and more. It is about being a little more thoughtful about where you are building your audiences, as well as sort of how you are making that case over time, so that when you have a big moment, you've got your member drive, you've got your 24-hour campaign, that you can really make a splash.
Thank you.
So let's talk about mobile messaging. Mobile messaging is one of the places where we are seeing growth. The story of mobile messaging overall is it is growing faster than email, but it is much smaller. That's essentially the takeaway here. So much smaller at this rate. So for every 1,000 email subscribers, on average, nonprofits in our study had 224 mobile subscribers. So about a quarter the size of what they have in their email subscriber base. That varies a lot by issue area. So we see the right sector groups that typically have done a lot of organizing, a lot of activism. You tend to see much larger mobile lists relative to their email list size. So it's about half the size instead of a quarter of the size. And we did see mobile lists growing faster. So 8% growth compared to the 3% growth we saw just a couple of slides ago for email. It's growing faster. And that growth is sort of, again, this is sort of a longer term trend. We see a smaller file, but faster growth for mobile. It's catching up slowly over time. The volume is significantly lower. So I mentioned earlier there are about 68 email messages being sent by an average nonprofit over the course of the year. I think it's about a quarter of that for mobile, much smaller. And what we typically see also is much more sporadic mobile messaging. So where email campaigns are very often framed around, like we're going to have like a 6-message series over the course of 10 days, and we're going to sort of reinforce this message. I think a lot of nonprofits are hesitant to embrace that kind of a multi-message model in mobile, where it can just feel like we don't want to underway people, essentially get them to unsubscribe. I think a lot of groups are still sort of finding that balance. And so we tend to see a lot more is like, we're going to send our one SMS appeal, like as part of this 6-message email campaign, we're going to throw in one SMS to sort of supplement. And I think we're also seeing a little bit more experimental. Like, well, what if we build a little bit of narrative? What if we do text you every other day for 3 days and see how that goes? And building a little bit more of a campaign mentality around mobile as well. For every dollar raised through email, organizations raised 9 cents through mobile messaging. So you can see just as a percentage of overall revenue, it's much smaller. About a little bit less than 1% of all online revenue was sourced directly to mobile giving. And so that's the scale. So as we see these audiences growing, we see this being an increasingly, like there's promise here, but for most of the participants in our study, it is not a really significant chunk of revenue yet. It is a growing part of the program that is supplementing other channels rather than in many cases really driving it. That's not true everywhere. We do see hunger and poverty, 25% or 25 cents per dollar of email revenue. That's a good chunk of revenue. And for some smaller organizations, it can play a big role.
And I don't know, I don't know that y'all looked at this in the benchmarking, but just with some of your clients, Will, are you seeing the email audience and the SMS audience as kind of separate? Like those are two lines of revenue, or do you see them more kind of cross-pollinating?
When I develop a campaign plan, I include email and mobile messaging as part of the same messaging plan. I think that the individual people are largely overlapping, but also just in terms of sort of like what offers we want people to see. So I think it is helpful to see them as an overlapping audience. If you have the data and segmentation sophistication to be really specific and precise and say, we know who our email only people are, we know who our SMS only people are, and the overlap and we treat them differently, by all means, I think that's a great thing to be able to do. I know that that's a lot of resources for a lot of organizations, but I think treating them as an audience that is going to be seeing similar messages, that is going to be experiencing the world in similar ways and responding to the things they care about in similar ways, I think is helpful. And also, but as with email, just because you sent 5 emails doesn't mean that somebody read 5 emails. You have to sort of treat each thing as a standalone item that sort of functions on its own. There's so much more for all of these things. I feel like, oh no, all my favorite charts aren't here, but it's because.
Now, can I tell you, email is your favorite. Paid ads is my favorite. So I love this. You go, but let's get into paid ads.
The ads that we have a lot, so many interesting things. I think there's a lot of really interesting things around the emergence of connected TV, especially for larger organizations. And we're going to get a little bit into the multi-channel ads, which I think is the big story out of this. But just sort of walking through baseline. First, we're looking at how much organizations are spending in digital advertising. So this is not an ROI number. This is a ratio of, for every dollar you raise online, how much are you reinvesting into paid ads? And the average ratio there is 14 cents. So for every dollar that is being raised online through all sources, 14 cents of that is being then spent on paid advertising for all the different reasons that we do paid advertising. So that just gives you a sense of what's your online budget looking like, how much are your peers spending relatively? And you can see there's a pretty widespread there on the box and whiskers. That investment represented an 11% increase from the previous year. So advertising budgets keep on growing. And in a year where overall revenue growth was pretty modest, makes sense, I think, that we would see more investment toward advertising that is a proven generator of revenue. And a lot of the spending that we're seeing is going into direct funding. So this is what, we say email is a more difficult space to be fundraising in. How are we continue to find growth? Paid advertising is one of the most important ways to continue to find growth. And those things are not separate. So the good work we're doing in paid advertising to bring in donors is strengthening our email file. Having an email file that we can go to helps us get a positive ROI on some of the lead acquisition that we're getting through donations. If we're spending a lot on paid ads, it's not breaking even, but we can follow up with email appeals and turn people into monthly donors. Those things are sort of mutually reinforcing. So when we think about the channel, it's not just a messaging multi-channel approach or even an audience-based one. It's really sort of understanding how each channel is supporting a stronger channel sort of across the way. This is a look at, as we start thinking about end of year, wanted to make sure we include what it looks like to increase spending at end of year. So when we talk about a busy landscape in December, this is what that is. So investments in search go up, both because nonprofits are spending more, but also because there's more competition. So the price of search goes up. Similar for display inventories get more expensive, but we are seeing much bigger investments in especially fundraising advertising as we hit the end of the year.
Can I say one thing on this slide, Will? We talk a lot with our clients about always on. There's clearly need to advertise in November, December. I think everybody gets that. What some clients are not yet getting is that you have to always have these ads on. Maybe your volume goes up in December, but you're showing ads in June, July, August, all through the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is the actual return. So this is return on ad spend. This is what we see. And so some things here that are not a surprise. Search having the best return on ad spend of any channel has always been the case, always will be the case until Google breaks itself. And so I think we're seeing that for most nonprofits, the plan A is max out your search spend, spend as much as you can there because that's where you can see the most immediate return. This is also an audience that, it makes sense. People are searching for your keywords, for your organization's name. They're going to be likely to give, and we don't want to miss any of them. Part of this is you may not be reaching a lot of new folks by emphasizing that. And it is also, there's a ceiling to this. There are only so many people who are searching your terms. Once you run out of them, you need to start looking elsewhere. This is the first year that we reported on what we're calling multi-channel ad formats. This is essentially Google Performance Max is the most commonly known one of these. This is where you give your advertising content to the platform and it mixes and matches lots of different assets and puts them in a spread. So for Performance Max, it is some search, it is some display, it is some programmatic. It's sort of all over the place, and Google tries to optimize. We are seeing a really strong ROAS there. So $1.50 is better than anything else except for search. I think partly because it includes some search. So there's a little bit of a messiness here. But as we look ahead at sort of what the platforms want us to do, because we are not operating in a vacuum, Google sets the ground rules in a lot of ways. Apple sets the ground rules, and we try to live within that universe in a lot of ways. This is, I think, a really important thing to be. If you have not already started experimenting with Performance Max or some of these other multi-channel ad formats, it is time to start looking into that because that is where the platforms are pushing us. And we are seeing, the good news is we are seeing strong results there. And so I'd much rather see this than multi-channel ad formats is what they're trying to force us to do. And it's a 9-cent ROAS. We are seeing a positive return there. And it's worth investing time and resources into optimizing that.
Can I add, just to gild your lily just a little bit? We see exactly this. So when I saw this data in your benchmark, it made us all feel good. We've loved PMax for a long time because it's it's a relatively accessible tool for most teams, no matter how big or small they are, because it is AI generated. It's easy to put the content in. Meta had usually been the area where most of our clients overspent without really measuring ROAS very carefully. But Meta, to your point earlier, is great for generating additional leads, generating emails, generating mobile numbers. Meta is really good at this. So there's a use for Meta that we're finding that's different maybe from Google and Bing and some of this PMax activity that's at the bottom of the funnel. The only thing I'll say to worry us is search is usually brand search. So, when we're looking at what inside of that search is working great, it's usually the brand search. I'm searching for the brand of the nonprofit. Well, ChatGPT is just eating the lunch of search. Can I tell you this? As you look at where our search is being done, they're being done in ChatGPT. How are we going to deal with a reducing number of clicks coming out of Google search? Don't know yet. Let's watch it.
Yeah. That's a good segue to talking about AI.
There you go. There you go. I knew what was coming.
Wow.
So this is the first time that we have in benchmarks asked about AI, and it's a pretty limited data set, but we want to share what we have. So we asked general survey questions of, is your organization using generative AI in any aspects of marketing, fundraising, advocacy? AI, even talking specifically about generative AI, it's a big broad category. It's not one tool. People have lots of different use cases. So I think it's important to sort of think about how we're interpreting this. So among nonprofits that did report using generative AI in at least one aspect of their work, the most common use was workplace productivity. So this is things like note-taking, the automatic note-taking and transcript generation that we're doing in meetings a lot of the time right now, doing the fancy calendaring thing where it reserves your time and sort of try to figure it all out. Lots of different tools for these things. That's the most common use case within these programs. There's also some use of developing written content. Again, we don't know if this means sending the email or coming up with subject lines or exactly what level. So 53% are using some sort of written content generation. Using a generative AI for graphics or video is much less common, or was much less common in last year. This is changing fast. But overall, 78% of organizations in our study reported using generative AI in some way within their programs. And if we look at the next slide, only 42% of them had policies or procedures or guidelines around what they would use AI for. And so I think this is a place where, in many cases, I think the tools are outpacing sort of the understanding of sort of the thoughtful approaches, I think, to using these tools. I think for a lot of folks, especially 2024 was a time of here's a new thing, let's experiment with it and try it out. And I think what we're starting to see a little bit more of now is being where does this fit in, and beyond experimentation, beyond sort of like fiddling around with the novelty of saying, how are we actually going to sort of either put guidelines around this, make sure that this is abiding by our other standards, making sure that we're doing fact checking in various ways, all of the sort of ways that we use tools that sort of like have guidelines, have procedures and policies in place.
Will, how do you think this will affect year-end fundraising? This advent of AI, do you have any thoughts about how will AI impact what we're going to see in the digital revenue in the next 6 months?
I'm going to be very consultative. It depends. I think a few things that I could see happening. So I don't like to make predictions. I like to look at data that has happened and interpret it. I would say, one of the things that we have seen is a trend toward higher volume over previous years. And one of the limiting factors of higher volume is the ability to create the content. The limiting factor of somebody's got to write this stuff is gone if you want it to be. And so I think the flood of content that has happened, I think is going to continue to increase. I don't think that I think a lot of successful programs are not going to feel the need to do that. But I think a lot of programs that are looking to boost their bottom line, or organizations that maybe are understaffed, are like, how do we do this? Now suddenly we can send just as many emails as the big organizations that are sending 20 in December. So I think we may see some of that with corresponding quality, I think, in a lot of cases. I think that's one of the things that we may see. I think you already pointed out to one of the big things, Philip, which is search, the way that search is going to be affected by this. And it is part of the ChatGPT search, which you referenced, but also what happens when you go to Google and you say this issue area, and instead of getting a link to your organization or before the link to your organization, you get the summary, which may give all the information that somebody needs, or it's not necessarily what we would want them to see if we're trying to convert them to donors at the end of the year. So I think that is going to be a really big impact on it as well.
We've got you recorded on your forecast, and we'll play it next year. Okay, Jess, on the next slide, just click it one at a time. What I was going to show the audience is, I think a lot of you are already using AI more than you think. Will's already talked about PMax like 5 times. There's PMax in both Google and in Bing that's using AI to set those ads. There's Fundraise Up. Sal's asking questions. He's representing Fundraise. There's forms that will change the giving amounts based on AI, based on what version your iPhone is and where in Florida you're coming from. And then the next click, we're starting to see AI from Tiberio and Avid being used to look backward in your data to say, which segment of people should I email? Which segment of people should I direct mail? Can I send less direct mail, but still increase my revenues? AI is being used all over the industry, and I don't see it going anywhere fast. I mean, Will is saying that organizations are cautious about generative AI in video. One of my current fascinations is, did you see the guy who made the ad during the NBA playoffs using Google's new VO2? It's unbelievable. And he did it in 2 days, this guy. So we are seeing the advent of these video models just kind of explode. So it'll be interesting to follow. My question is always, how is it going to affect revenue? How will it affect revenue? Okay. Now we got 20 minutes left. We got questions from the audience. Everybody keep asking.
Everybody's end of year programs in the next 20 minutes.
Everybody's end of year program. Most of the money is ahead of us. It's not behind us. It's coming up.
Yeah, well, I think that's this chart right here.
Let Will start this one.
Just as a reminder, December fundraising is important for a lot of online programs. On average, 40% of all this is just one-time revenue. So this does not incorporate a monthly giving. If we're looking at just those people saying, here's $50, 40% of that is coming in December for the entire year. So pretty important. Or this was in 2024. It might look a little bit different depending on where Giving Tuesday falls.
It's in December 2nd. It's in December again this year.
It's in December, unfortunately.
So we can go to the next one to see some year-over-year numbers. Or this is not year. So one of the things that does make year-over-year comparisons difficult is that shifting Giving Tuesday. So sometimes when we look at end of year, we just include November and December as sort of like one chunk so we can make those year-over-year comparisons. This now includes monthly giving. So this is for all online revenue. 38% of revenues coming in those last 2 months. In the week of December 31st, it's 12% of the full year's revenue comes in that last week. 5% comes on the last day of the year. So that one day accounts for 5% of the full year's fundraising, which makes it, I think, like something like 18 and a half times more important than the average day. I think is what the math's out to. So this is sort of like the pressure and the increasing time pressure that all of our programs really feel in the digital space as we approach the end of the year. And as I referenced earlier, so a lot of the stuff that we do now is going to determine the success. It's very hard on December 30th to figure out like if things are not working and you're struggling to reach your budget numbers, there are only so many levers you can pull at that point. And it is, I think, really important to start thinking about that now. I think thinking about lead generation, thinking about list growth, all of those efforts, and as well as engaging and strengthening relationships with your list over the fall quarter, really, I think is really, really important.
It's one of the things I don't like about our sector is that it's so concentrated. It creates so much pressure, so much nerve, so much worry that, you know, we are basically beholden to people's, I guess, cultural norms about when they donate, that there's not much that we can do to shift it. Giving Tuesday was an example of shifting behavior. It didn't used to exist. Now it does. And so one of the things that we try to work with our clients on is how do we start getting ahead of the revenue in the summer, in the early fall, so that let's say the worst case happens and there's some mix up at the end of the year. Boy, not everything's riding on it. You're showing that it's 38%, you know, in November and December. How do we make that 35? Do you know what I mean? Every little percentage counts so that we're just less nervous during that period of time.
Well, and we use the example of higher ed because they do giving days early, like they do giving days. And often with some of our higher eds, they're like, oh, and we're like, what's the significance of this day? And they're like, there's no significance. We're just trying to drive revenue in March. And, you know, so trying to find those opportunities where this is not, you know, where can we move the needle? Because to your point, Will, like, look at February, you raise more on the last day of the year than the entire month of February. You know, it's so.
Oh, yeah. Combined.
Yeah, so we also produce a UK and Ireland version of benchmarks looking only at organizations there, and it's not the same. That's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, and the December 31st like spike, it doesn't exist. It is entirely a cultural artifact of US and I think Canadian fundraising as well, where part of it is the tax treatment of charitable giving in the US. But it's not, I don't think it's only that. I think for a lot of donors, it's just like, this is when they do it. This is when they make their holiday giving. And yeah, I would love it if Giving Tuesday was in like March. That's what I know. But nobody asked me, so that's not how it goes. Would you have a question in the chat? I see from Kate about open rates.
I was going to say, Will, over to you. Now, let's open it up now. Open up to the floor and just start asking questions about anything that we've brought up or anything on your mind about your end of year giving. So Kate's like, hey, what's going on with open rates and why are we not as excited about open rates as we used to be?
Sure. So I'll give you the quickest first. So I'm linking to the full study here because we do have more to say about open rates, and we stopped reporting on open rates a couple of years ago in benchmarks. And the reason why is because an iOS update made it so that essentially, if you are looking at your mail on an iPhone, it counts as opened. The Apple will basically download the images, and then everybody with their mail set up on their phone, regardless of who is their email provider, is marking all their emails as open. It's like the short version of it. And because of that, email open rates went from 12% to 35% overnight for a lot of organizations. And that did not reflect more people opening. It's really hard. It is possible, but most nonprofits are not set up to distinguish between a machine open, Apple doing that, or somebody actually, a human being looking at it with their eyeballs. And so that difference has made it really hard to track open rates as a measure of health of the sector overall. So comparing open rates from organization X and organization Y, it's too messy. And so we dropped it. Click-through rates we can still track directly. Open rates we can't track directly in a reliable way. It's not useful in that sense. Within your own tracking, it can still be useful if you're tracking consistently over time through the same platform, and especially if you can distinguish between machine and human opens, it can still be useful. So I wouldn't say open rates are no good. They're just not good in an aggregate sense for benchmarks. The other use, and I referred to this earlier, for open rates is to assess whether an individual email address is active or inactive. So if we are getting opens from this email address, we don't have to know whether that's a person opening it or Apple opening it. We know that it's an active email address. Otherwise, it wouldn't be loaded onto that phone and loading emails. Mm-hmm. And so that is in and of itself enough to tell us this person can be treated as active or inactive, or this email address can be treated as active or inactive. So that's useful. There's a little more. We go into depth in that a little bit more in the study, but that's sort of the quick version.
But yeah, just to put a finer point, I think the days of, 4 or 5 years ago using like subject line testing and like, oh, subject line A had this much higher open rates than B, I think we have determined that, that is not an accurate measure of if that subject line actually was more effective than the other because of these updates that were made.
There's still lots of questions about email because it's a big part of a lot of people's program. And I think speaking on behalf of some of our clients, they're a little worried about it. You know, it's kind of showing what you showed in the benchmark data. It's growing maybe in the list size, but the revenue is shrinking and the response rates are lower. The click-through rates are harder to get. So it does become a focus of a lot of work between now and the end of the year.
But
it's also, I would say, a focus of a lot of work because it generates a lot of data. So this is something that I think is also really like there's so many things you can track, and so it feels like you have a lot of control because there's so many different levers you can pull. And I think that it is important to remember how much benefit you are likely to get from some of the more elaborate efforts to sort of adjust those small numbers.
Yep.
But also, I mean, I use this analogy a bazillion times. It's this idea of, rising tide lifts all boat. And I think, if you suddenly said, okay, no, we're going to cut back on email, to your point earlier, well, you feel like it's understated because how many people receive an email and then just go and Google it or type in a URL? Now that's a direct conversion as opposed to the email, but what actually prompted that gift was the email in their inbox. So looking at your program in like a very fulsome way to make sure you're understanding that one channel does affect another channel. And at the end of the day, we're trying to just raise revenue overall.
Well, to that point, and Jess, maybe you want to go to the next slide. So they've got our contact info as we're kind of wrapping up here with the questions. How many of you send direct mail to people who came to you online? Because that's a juicy question with our clients these days. Generally speaking, a lot of the clients, we're not sending people who came online to make the gift direct mail. They came from email, they're direct mail, they're online donors. But we're finding that if you do send them direct mail, the return rate is much higher. They may return online, but they return just after receiving that piece of direct mail. So don't think of these audiences as little silos. Here's my online people, here's my offline people, and they're separate. They're the same people in many cases, and it depends on the day which kind of prompt they're going to respond to.
Yeah, and I think the attribution is really important. And I think in the ad space, there's a lot more sort of experience in balancing the various forms of attribution, view through, click through, sort of like deciding what it is that moves somebody to give or to take action. I think it's helpful to apply that thinking to other channels as well. Like there's such a thing as view through revenue for your direct mail, right? Like people who have seen that and gave it a different channel. But a lot of nonprofits are not really set up to be thinking about attribution in that way.
Any other questions from the audience? While we have Will, this is special, so ask him some tough questions.
Oh, and I think the other thing to attribution, also making sure you're for things like paid ads. And I know paid ads, when I watched the benchmark study, paid ads, I think, was a controversial subject within M+R, just some of the changes, but also tracking new versus existing, because everyone for cost to acquire versus in other channels, for example, face-to-face for a new monthly donor. I mean, some organizations will spend upwards of $500 to acquire one face-to-face donor. Well, if you can acquire them online, yes, maybe this volume isn't quite the same as face-to-face, but you're acquiring those donors at a much lower cost to acquire. So just being sure to track via UTM codes, new and existing, so that you can fully report kind of on long-term value and cost to acquire as well. Oh, Sal's asking the Canadian orgs. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know how many
I'm looking at our participants list right now. There are a few. The majority are US based. But I do see Red Cross Canada, Canadian Red Cross. I see Save the Children Canada. I see Nature Conservancy of Canada and Nature Quebec. A couple of other ones as well. So they are a minority of those.
Inspire. Yep.
Inspire is in there. That's right. So you're getting more Canadian content. The big difference in Canada at a high level was our postal strike. And so the postal strike artificially inflated a lot of online revenue at the end of last year. And so now what we're trying to do is beat that number, but it's an inflated number. And what if we don't have a postal strike? What happens? But we did find that a lot of the direct mail donors will give online if we give them a reason to. And the postal strike was a great reason to.
I would say that our difference is that we did have a U.S. presidential election last year.
Well, there was that too.
The short version of the impact of that, just for folks know, it didn't seem to have a lot of impact for those groups that are in doing politics ahead of the election. But the period from the election day toward the end of the year was we saw a big spike, especially in email giving for groups that do political work. So we saw suddenly a lot of interest in that. Another reason why email, I think, is an important channel to maintain and continue to feed that, because when you do see a moment where suddenly you're more important to your audience relative to other times, that's one of the places where you have the quickest ability to sort of reach them and get them motivated and engaged.
There was a Canadian election. It didn't make as big of a splash, and they were very polite and held it in the spring, so it didn't affect our year-end giving.
That was nice of them.
But I guess we'll see the effects of that in the 2025 benchmarking if there are.
We'll see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Any final questions from the audience or any final comments, Will or Jess, in terms of things that you can think about now as we move into the big money, that we're going to have so much of the revenue to raise in the next 6 months? What is on your mind? Like if you were advising a client right now, how would you advise them?
I am advising guys right now. The things that we are thinking about, part of it is so uncertain for a lot of issue areas because of the budget that we are dealing with now. So a lot of folks are in a sort of substantive, like narrative sense, in a wait and see mode because we aren't quite sure. We still have one more day of Supreme Court term here, and we still have the budget fight and whatever else comes out of the federal government. So the uncertainty there around what are we going to be saying, I think, is really widespread, and a lot of folks are like, we're not quite sure what the narrative is going to look like. So some of the things that we can do to prepare in the absence of narrative certainty are building audience. So this is a great time to be running lead gen ads and starting to make that case for folks who we do not expect to make a donation until November and December. Right, now is the time to be building that longer term investment in lists, and by lists I mean email, I mean SMS, I mean all the different channels that you would have. I think that's one of the most important things. I think now is a time for optimization as well. So in that paid advertising space, where we don't want to wait until last minute to turn something on, we want to start figuring out what's resonating and what's working with folks. So creative testing over the summer, this is a great time to be doing some of that work to start figuring out what is going to work and what are people responding to.
That's great advice. It's great advice. Will we show the presentation? Yes. Do we think that the giving patterns will change because of the postal strike? Yes, it will have an impact. We have to keep an eye on it. What else would I say? The economy does affect giving. Jerome Powell, who's the U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman, did not lower interest rates this week. I don't know if any of you pay attention to this, but he's like, kind of what Will said, we got to wait and see. So there is this kind of uncertainty about the economic future in the next 6 months that will affect giving. We do see that being a big impact on giving. So I think your advice is great, Will. Use the summer to test, use the summer to build audiences, build your email list, test mobile giving. A lot of the Canadians haven't gotten into the mobile messaging yet, so it's a big opportunity for them. What did you say, Jess?
Stewardship, to build relationships and steward your audience.
Strengthen the relationships, try to preload some of that revenue if you can, create a giving day, try creating a giving day other than Giving Tuesday. There's a lot of things we do have control over. Some things we don't, some things we do.
Yeah, there's economic impact. I mean, all of this is also really depends on your issue area. So if you're a food bank, the way that an economic downturn affects your giving, you might see a surge in revenue because people see the increased need, and you might not see that for some other issue areas. It's so hard to say. Real world events are going to affect us, and I think this is in particular true for frontline organizations, whether you're working on hunger and poverty issues domestically or whether you're doing international aid and development. What happens in the world really, really drives donor attention. And so I think it's hard for us, we can't predict what people will be feeling and focusing on in November, December. Stuff we can control, the near term stuff that sets us up for success, regardless of what that narrative moment looks like.
Well, I want to thank you, Will, for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. It's been fantastic. The benchmark
also for all your efforts on writing it. If you haven't read it, it's this so year was beautiful with poetry throughout. Yeah. So it's a real joy every year. We can't wait to see.
We do a theme every year. I don't know if people know. We do a theme every year. This year it was poetry.
It was poetry.
Poems throughout. And also many mean things about Elon Musk, if that is the sort of thing that you think you might be interested in reading.
All right. Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, for spending an hour with us. And we'll send you the presentation and the recording at some point after this. Okay?
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Enjoy the afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.